So if you were going to ask a math professor what the heck was log base 2 to the n, what does that, what is that definition, right? And they might give you something like this. Oh, log, right? Well, let's suppose it's actually a generalized log base b of n, that is equal to x, where x is, b is, where b to the x is equal to n, right? And that doesn't really give you much because, we're introducing another unknown variable into an equation which doesn't make much sense, which already deals with exponents. It's already hard. Basically, it's essentially this inverse relationship over here that's describing, but that's not easy for us to understand with our little monkey brains here, right? So, it's also just not intuitive. It doesn't really give you an intuitive definition, right? So right now, my goal is, just like we're trying to build an intuitive definition of what big O runtime is, I'm going to try my best to give you an intuitive definition of what O of log of n is. So when I'm talking about log of n, specifically log base 2 of n, log LG of n is the number of times I can split a pile of n things in half. That's it. That's really all it is. So let's go ahead and take an example of log base 2 of 64. Sorry, right? So log base 2 of 64. Okay, so that means that I have 64 things. Let's go ahead and see. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and split that in half once, and I've got 2 piles of 32. And then I'm going to split those piles of 32 in half again, right? 16. And then I'm going to split those piles in half once again into 8, and then 4, and then 2, and then 1. All in total, how many splits were there? 64 to 32, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we split this in half 6 times, right? Yes, there's 7 lines, but we split it in half 6 times until we could get to 1, and then we can't split 1 in half anymore. I can't take a whole thing and turn it into half, right, without defeating the purpose of this exercise. So I'm going to say that it's 6. Now let's go ahead and double check our answer using that dreadful equation, right, by saying, okay, so log base 64 is equal to, log base 2 of 64 is equal to 2 to the, is equal to x, where 2 to the x is equal to 64. So how many 2's do I have to multiply together to make 64? Well, if you remember from our video a bit ago, 2 to the 5th was 32. So multiply by that 2 again, we'd get 64. So 2 to the 6th is 64, right? So it works out there. And that's what, when we have a log n, what does that mean? That means it's the number of times I can split it in half. So what does big O log of n mean? That means that effectively I'm in a class of algorithms where each step I take, each step of the algorithm, doesn't just compute one unit of work like linear time, but it does orders of magnitude better, where one step of work splits the amount of remaining of work I have to do, the amount of steps I have to do in half, right? I go from 100 items to 50 items to 25 and so on and so forth until I get to my answer. So log base 2 of n means that basically that this is an order where this is a time complexity where each step I take splits everything into halves. Now, similarly, let's go ahead and just show that this intuitively works for other things. What about log base 10, general log, right? What about log base 10 of 100? Well, we can split 100 in, so log base 2 was how many things I could split a pile in half. In other words, how many times I could split something into 2 piles. Well, what about log base 10? Well, that's how many times I can split things into a pile of n things into tenths. So log base 10 over here, right, is equal to, well, we can split that into 10 piles of 10, right, and each of those 10 piles of 10 into 1, right, so we can split it in half twice, right, and that should make sense. 10 squared is equal to 100, right? Same for 1,000, right? that would be 10 piles of 100, and those piles of 100 would be split into 10 piles of 10, and then 10 piles of 1, and so on and so forth. Now notice that this very carefully avoids like those decimal points and stuff that, what if, when stuff is uneven. I'm just talking about things that can cleanly divide wholly. And that's, again, just to give you an intuitive understanding of how these logarithms work and what log n time means. It means that we are splitting things in half. If it was log base 3, we'd be splitting things into third, right? Each step would reduce my search space to a third of what it was, okay, as opposed to half. So, all right. So with that said, we can start thinking about how to do this algorithm.